All right, there we go. We are live on YouTube. Looks like we are live and ready to go on Facebook as well. There we go. Comments are rolling in. Yeah, welcome in, Current Covers. We got a little bit of news here right off the top. The first college football playoff rankings are out, and people are pretty upset online at where Georgia came in. It's actually, I think, quite funny. Georgia first college football playoff rankings came out. Georgia Bulldogs come in at number 9. We'll go into that here off the top. We'll give everyone a minute or two to sort of get in here, see what's up, what's happening. Talk about what's going on. Obviously, the big game this past weekend against Mississippi State. Georgia wins that game pretty convincingly. Or I wouldn't say stop. Georgia played largely poorly against Mississippi State, but JT Daniels bailed them out with an incredible performance. Georgia takes on South Carolina this coming weekend. We've got Thanksgiving coming up, my personal favorite holiday. We'll take your comments and questions in here. It's already people talking about JT Daniels. We'll get to that second. We'll lead off here shortly with CFP rankings, initial thoughts. Yeah, Jonathan Clark, Georgia's lucky to be 9. I would definitely absolutely say that is correct there. Some of the other big initial takeaways, BYU being at 14, I think people are upset about that based on just the way they've played. BYU is a lot of fun to watch, and I wouldn't have an issue if you ranked BYU ahead of Georgia, just given Georgia hasn't played a good game since Tennessee, and that was back on October 10th. So that's almost 6 weeks ago now. Jerry Swafford saying he expected Georgia to be outside the top 10. I'm not surprised Georgia was ranked above Miami. I know Miami has the nice win-loss record, but they have not played well. They're currently missing. They didn't play last week, and they're not going to play this week due to COVID. So we'll sort of see with what happens there. Georgia is the highest 2-loss ranked team, and you look at A&M, you look at Florida. They both, I believe, have chances to lose again on their schedule. A&M next week has to go to Auburn. Florida, obviously, I think their loss is probably going to come in the SEC championship game to Alabama. Now, Georgia almost assuredly won't be ranked ahead of Florida when those final rankings come out. I'd be floored if that happens. But the opportunity for New Year's Six Bowl comes. If all chaos breaks loose, could Georgia find a way to get in there? Potentially. The playoff committee today did have Alabama at number 1, Notre Dame at number 2. Was a little bit of a surprise. Clemson at number 3, Ohio State at number 4, Texas A&M at number 5, Florida at number 6. So right now, anyway, while Florida has probably a better resume than Texas A&M does, Texas A&M does have that head-to-head win over Florida. So you're seeing the committee choose to value that there. Number 7, Cincinnati comes in. It's going to be tough for them to continue to move up. Northwestern at number 8, Georgia at number 9. And then Miami at number 10, they're sort of rounding things off. Auburn is number 22. That is Georgia's lone, I guess, ranked college football playoff win. So interesting to sort of see where they go. Yeah, Greg Childers, I feel like there's a lot of things we don't know about this A&M team. A&M hasn't played a game since November 7th, and they have a game against Ole Miss to make up. They have a game against Tennessee to make up, which they're going to want to, I think, make those games up to give the committee more of an eye test, more of a chance to sort of see what's out there, because Ohio State and Northwestern, those are 2 Power 5 conference teams, and those teams are all ranked below the other unbeaten Power 5 teams, including Ohio State being ranked below Clemson. I think that's a byproduct of how they looked this past weekend against Indiana. So it'll be interesting to see how they continue to view the Big Ten. They had Wisconsin at number 16, which I found to be very interesting. They had Oklahoma over Iowa State, even though Iowa State beat Oklahoma. So some interesting stuff there from the initial rankings. Georgia comes on at number 9. Greg Childers brings up Georgia can finish in the top 5. Yeah, it'll be number 5. But they went out. They play, say, Cincinnati in the Peach Bowl, which could very likely be a matchup, I think, between the number 5 and number 6 teams in the country when that game is ultimately played. And I know a lot of outside people might not be excited about that, but Cincinnati's a good team. And you look a few years ago, Auburn went and played with its foot in the Peach Bowl against UCF, and it gave a lot of people a leg to stand on, sort of in terms of talking about things. And even I think you look last year, that Sugar Bowl against Baylor, Georgia's obviously a better team, but just think about the offseason we had in the talk surrounding Georgia was so much better, so much easier, so much more pleasant than it was sort of the year before when they had lost to a Texas team that, frankly, wasn't as good as that Georgia team was. So, yeah, G-Bama boy. One of the things that I've sort of – I don't know if it's disappointed but perplexed by is everyone saying that Florida is going to lose 2 of their next 3 games or Georgia's going to find a way to get in the SEC championship game. Florida's played one score game this year. That was at Texas A&M, and it was a game that they were leading by double digits. This Florida team is going to blow out a Kentucky team that has been pretty beaten up by COVID in recent weeks. They were without their leading rusher last week, and his status is not known, Chris Rodriguez, for the game this weekend. LSU's not very good this year. Neither is Tennessee. The reality is right now, they don't play a team with a rating above 500 record the rest of their season in their final 3 games. So while I'm sure Kentucky, LSU, and Tennessee might look like appetizing games, the reality this year is none of those teams are all that good. I expect Florida to roll in those 3 games. But ultimately, I just think Alabama is too good. Quite frankly, I think Alabama is head and shoulders better than everyone else in college football this season. Offensively, they can beat you any way you want. They can make those downfield throws, and they can run the football with Najee Harris. Defensively, they've gotten so much better since that Ole Miss game. Really started in the second half there against Georgia, and then they shut out Mississippi State. They gave up just a field goal to Kentucky. This team is getting better and better and peaking as we get later and later into the season. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how these rankings go from here to here, from week to week. There's only a few weeks left in the season, so I think if you're a Georgia fan, you take the number 9 ranking. The national media is going to come out and bash you about it, but it is what it is. And what you have to do is just focus, play the best you can the rest of the season. That starts this Saturday against South Carolina. It's a chance for this Georgia offense to once again come out and look good, come out and play good. JT Daniels to build off what he did last week, 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. I know I've already seen a healthy amount of comments about he should have been playing for the Florida game. And I mean, ultimately, that's the biggest question for this season. I don't think JT was fully healthy and ready to go for that Alabama game. And as I sort of just laid out there, I don't think Georgia beats Alabama even if JT Daniels was healthy. The Florida game is a different question because that game, if Lewis Cine makes a play, it's a 1-score game in the fourth quarter there. And, you know, does Georgia still win that game with JT Daniels? The defense would have had to play much better that day. But if the offense is able to continuously build off that 14-0 lead that Stetson Bennett got them prior to him getting injured, I think – you know, maybe that game does play out differently. If Georgia wins that game, they're being talked about as probably a top 4 team right now, where you understand Clemson lost to Notre Dame and Clemson comes in at number 3. Georgia, in my opinion, would probably be number 4 ahead of Ohio State if Georgia were to win that Florida game. But that's unfortunately just where we are in this world. So moving ahead, we'll keep diving into JT Daniels. I saw someone say the media seems to really love JT. Jonathan Clark brings that up. I mean, based off what we saw, what's not to like? 401 yards, you don't want to shortchange him. 4 touchdowns. The best passing performance of the Kirby Smart era. And it's not even so much the raw statistical totals. It was how he was doing it. He was hitting receivers open downfield. The first touchdown to George Pickens, ball came out, hit Pickens right as he was coming out of his route. That's how pros do it. Sorry, getting a little... Daniels was just so – it was so different than what we had seen, even from when Jake Fromm was a quarterback. He was making the downfield throws. Georgia had guys in one-on-one positions all day, and Daniels consistently hit them, and he made the plays that need to be played. Is he going to throw for 400 yards every week? Absolutely not. I don't think that's something that you can expect every week. But if he keeps playing well and he continues to build off what he did against Mississippi State, and he keeps showing that he can make Georgia into an explosive passing offense, I think that's going to say a lot both for this team this season, especially as we continue to look back at that Florida game, but more importantly, going into 2021, because if he comes back, which I right now still expect him to do so just because it's a deep year at quarterback, and he's not going to have the requisite sort of game reps that you look for from a starting NFL caliber quarterback, a.k.a. just go look at what happened with Mitch Trubisky when he'd only started, I believe, 13 career games. Usually you want to try and get up to 25, a.k.a. 2 full seasons of games. That's why Justin Fields didn't opt out, because he doesn't have that. He's trying to play this season so that he can get that sort of requisite number of games to get those throws on tape so that teams have a little bit more known about him. And he's a little bit better off when it comes to going out there and playing at the college level. So, yeah, RJ Reigns, he should be at least 250 yards every week. That's the ideal scenario there because you don't need him to throw for 400 yards if the running game is playing better. Now, the running game, as great as JT Daniels was atrocious on Saturday against Mississippi State. And that's largely, I believe, just due to the offensive line and the way Mississippi State was committed to playing Georgia. They said, if you want to beat us, you're going to have to do it by making those layup throws, by beating them downfield. And credit to Georgia and JT Daniels for doing that, but they said, you were absolutely not running on us. We think we can beat you at the line of scrimmage. And that's what they did. Whether or not South Carolina is able to do anything on that, we'll see. In a similar way, they play a very different front end. I mean, the reality is Mississippi State's defense has actually been pretty good this year. They rank in the top 10 in a couple categories nationally. South Carolina's defense has been largely trashed this last month or so. You saw Will Muschamp get fired, and then J.C. Horn and Israel Mukwamu, who had 3 interceptions, and Jake Fromm last year when these two teams met. They will not be playing in this game. It's interim coach Mike Bobo. It'll be interesting to see sort of where South Carolina is up in this game, especially if Georgia gets out to an early lead. And this is a Georgia team that's motivated to sort of prove that last year was just a fluke. It was a one-off, that Georgia is better than this South Carolina team. And I think that's something to be very much watching for this weekend. I expect Georgia to win. The weather might be an issue, but ultimately this is a game you got to win. And if JT looks impressive again, that's just another feather in his cap, and that's another, I think, strong sign towards the 2021 season, which is ultimately, I believe, what Georgia is playing for now. Yes, they can still go 8-2 this year, get to a New Year's Six Bowl, most likely the Peach Bowl, which the one good thing if you're a Georgia fan seeing this team come in at 9 is, all right, the committee wants this Georgia team in a group of 6 bowl, because if they wanted to knock them down a peg and put, say, a 1-loss Indiana, a 1-loss Miami, the best team in the Big 12, Iowa State, ahead of these teams, even an undefeated Oregon who came in at number 15, I think that says a lot about what they think of the Pac-12 right now. They could have done that, but they have Georgia as a top 10 team, number 9 in the country, the top two-loss ranked team out there. And that says to me, all right, Georgia's probably going to be playing in a New Year's Six Bowl so long as it wins out and wins the rest of their games, because Alabama's going to the playoff. Loser of the you have either if A&M wins out, or if A&M loses to Auburn and Florida plays a competitive game against Alabama, one of those teams is going to the Sugar Bowl, and you'll have 2 at-large spots, probably one to the Orange Bowl and one to the Peach Bowl to send those other 2 SEC teams. So that's sort of a brief bowl breakdown right there and sort of what Georgia's ranking means. They play South Carolina this weekend. Just go out and win. You know, even the very weird thing about the Mississippi State game is Georgia's defense did not play well, which I think the last month now, without Richard LeCounte, you've seen just how important he was to this defense. And I asked Kirby Smart about this tonight. I'll have a story on it coming tomorrow morning. The biggest thing is just it's the playmaking ability that he brought. He was a playmaker, difference maker, beyond just the communication and not giving up the big plays. When you needed an interception, he was the guy that was going to make it. When you needed a fumble recovery, he was going to make it, like he did in the Kentucky game. He's going to break up passes, as he had 3 of those in his last game he played. And not having that out there, you know, Lewis Cine, I think, could eventually get to that spot, but right now he's not there. And to be fair to Lewis, Richard LeCounte was not there in his second year either. I actually think, to Lewis Cine's credit, he's maybe a little bit further along as a player than Richard was as a sophomore back in 2018. So it's just it's one of the things Georgia really misses, along with just his energy and the vocal leader that he is. So I saw somebody ask about his status. He's not going to play this week. The hope is that they get him back before the Vanderbilt game or that Missouri game, which is still yet to be decided on when that is played. It could either be the 12th or the 19th. Missouri now also has a game against Arkansas that needs to get made up. So the SEC is going to have to make some decisions here. Wade Josie brings up, the defense looks totally confused. I think that's just a big byproduct of just not having Richard LeCounte out there, both from what he brings as an individual talent. I still believe he is an all-SEC safety. I would have him as first-team all-SEC safety if he doesn't play another game this season. He was that good for Georgia in their first 5 games. But even the communication part, I think you see the way Mississippi State took care of the underneath, took advantage of the underneath routes, the way Florida hit running backs out of the backfield. Those are sort of things I don't believe happen if Richard LeCounte is your starting safety there. So that's sort of the Richie update. Questions, comments, thoughts. We've got Thanksgiving coming up this weekend. We'll see. It's my favorite holiday. Any takes you guys have on it? You fried turkey or just a regular turkey, stuffing or dressing? I'm guessing a lot of you people are dressing people because this is a largely Southern football team and Southern following. So it'll be interesting to see what you guys think of that. And then just any other comments, questions we have. We're about halfway through the show tonight. Topics off the top. Georgia comes in at number 9 in the college football playoff rankings. JT Daniels looks every bit as advertised and perhaps even too good, because now you're wondering, okay, why wasn't he playing against Florida? How healthy was that knee? Because if he looked like he did against Mississippi State, if he was maybe even 80% of that, why was he not playing against Florida? Because the quarterback play against Florida could not be farther from what it was from what Daniels put out there on Saturday. So, let's see. Comments, questions, thoughts. Johnny Lester brings up it's weird not playing Georgia Tech this week. I actually agree with that. I kind of wish they were. I know some people out there say, well, what's there to be gained by playing Georgia Tech? They're not a very good team this year. They lost by 73 to Clemson, to which I retort, well, I'd love to see Georgia put 74 on Clemson, or 74 on Georgia Tech and see what they can do there. I think, playing South Carolina this week, South Carolina is not a big rivalry game for Georgia. It obviously, I think, means a lot more to the South Carolina side than it does the Georgia side, but Auburn is a bigger rivalry. Florida is obviously a bigger rivalry. I think Tennessee, with the connections with Pruitt and some of the battles they've had in recent years, I think Georgia Tech is a bigger rivalry, speaking frankly there. So at best, I think Alabama is a bigger rivalry than South Carolina is, even though those two teams don't play every year. So that sort of makes South Carolina at best your 5th or 6th most interesting rival from a Georgia perspective. But as James Buckner points out, it's a payback game. Georgia lost this game at home to South Carolina a year ago, 20-17. It was sort of the reckoning of, wow, this team is pretty flawed. Georgia's offense really struggled that day, and from that point forward, opposing teams had a blueprint of how to beat this Georgia team. And LSU was the only team to do it, but Auburn really gummed them up. Texas A&M really gummed them up. Kentucky, though the rain aided in that one, gummed them up as well. It'll be interesting to see what this game looks like, especially because I don't think Kirby Smart wants to go out there and embarrass Mike Bobo. The two are friends. I don't think he was going to want to embarrass Will Muschamp either, because he pretty clearly was on thin ice there. So that'll be something worth watching. Mike Bobo is unfairly, I believe, a controversial figure at Georgia, just given his tenure as the offensive coordinator. By the time he left to become the head coach at Colorado State, I thought he was one of the best play callers in the country. I thought you saw a clear and immediate impact on what he brought to the Georgia program when he left in 2014 and then 2015 when Georgia brought in Brian Schottenheimer, and the offense just completely fell off a cliff. I know the quarterback concerns and questions still would have been there, but I absolutely believe it is a better-looking team in 2015 if Mike Bobo is Georgia's offensive coordinator than Brian Schottenheimer. And you wonder if Rick is still here, if Bobo's the offensive coordinator in 2015, and what that means for Kirby Smart. So I know this past offseason when he did leave Colorado State, there were people wondering if he would come back to Georgia in either an off-field role or potentially an on-field role, and ultimately he chose South Carolina. So we'll see going forward what Bobo and Georgia look like. Personally speaking, I think he's a great coach. I know he's a great recruiter, and I'd potentially one day love to see him come back, potentially be a quarterback's coach if Georgia wants to rejigger this current coaching staff in some way and figure out a way to get him in an on-field role. Or if someone leaves, that opens up something else as well there for you if you want to fill a staff there. So I'll be interested to see how Bobo looks. I know Talking Rock's not a fan. So I choose to root for Bobo. I like him. And, hopefully after the South Carolina job, I don't know if he's going to be retained or not, but I hope he lands on his feet because I believe he's a good coach. And ultimately, I think he's a very good representative of the University of Georgia. So Jake Perez brings up how good it must have felt for JT to hear his name chanted at the end of the game. Yeah, it's funny. I thought back. So at the Vanderbilt game last year, which Georgia fans absolutely took over, Zamir White's first carry, they're chanting his name. And it's funny the way it sort of dovetails where it was at the end of the game they were chanting JT's name because I think we all wanted to see Georgia clearly get that win. But That was his first game since August 31st of 2019. And for him to come out and play that way with that sort of confidence, and you can see on the Dog Nation YouTube channel the interview we did with him afterward, just the confidence that he has where he feels so comfortable, and he feels comfortable enough to say, hey, I know we have talented receivers here at the University of Georgia. George Pickens is that. Jermaine Burton is that. And Karis Jackson is that. If we've got those guys, let's throw it up to them. And if we're not going to throw it up to them, don't recruit players of that caliber. And I wholeheartedly agreed with that sentiment. Georgia has talent there. They have, with the three names I just mentioned, along with Dominic Blaylock, Marcus Rosemary-Jack-Saint, and Arian Smith, they have three top 150 wide receivers on this team. So we'll sort of see where it is there. So why did Bobo fail at Colorado State? Yeah, he failed there. I think that's fair to say. I think geographic distance may have been an issue there with, he is predominantly a Southern coach, and I believe recruiting is a big part of what he does, and it's just hard to get players to go out there. Would he have been more successful at, say, a Sun Belt school or an American Athletic Conference school? I think that's something to consider. And ultimately, he just might be a better play caller than he is a runner of a program. That's not something that's unique to a lot of coaches. Some coaches are just better play callers than head coaches. Noah Sheldon says he's not head coach material. Neither is Muschamp. But you'd be doing backflips, I believe, if you had either one of them as your offensive and defensive coordinator, especially at a high major program. So, let's see. Greg Childers, JT is an NFL QB. It certainly looked like it, just the way the ball comes out of his hands. And really, that first touchdown pass, I know yardage-wise it was the least impressive, but rolling to his right and Pickens, as soon as he turns around, the ball is on him. That's something that was missing because, again, as good as in what Stetson and Dwan were and as limited as they were, they would have waited for George to turn around to make sure that they were looking at him to throw the ball. With JT, he had the confidence in his arm and the trust in Pickens that he would turn around and make the catch and it'd be right on him. So I could not have been more impressed with what Daniels did. And frankly, the way he moved in the pocket, specifically on the drop touchdown catch that Pickens could have had there in the fourth quarter, on the one drive, the second of three touchdown passes he threw, he escapes that pocket and still somehow stays in there and steps up. And it was just something I did not think that he was going to be capable of, especially when we heard that mobility was a big reason why he hadn't gotten on the field yet. So I was just really impressed all around with what I saw, the way he moved, the way he threw the ball. And Georgia's now got to run the ball better. They run the ball better. That's going to set up things and just make life very difficult for defense, which leads into Chad Buchanan's comments. Daniels comes back next year, Georgia will be off the charts. Brock has a chance to learn the offense, get acclimated to the speed of the SEC game. It really sets Georgia up for a great future, and I probably agree with that. Because, again, Georgia is set to open next year against Clemson. As good as I think Brock Vandagriff could be, you don't want him starting week one. And Trevor Lawrence didn't start week one at Clemson. They eased Trevor in there. And now, if JT Daniels is playing like this, Brock Vandagriff isn't seeing the field next year. But I think if you're a Georgia fan, you absolutely live with that because Daniels is that good. And if he's playing at that level against a Mississippi State team consistently, that you absolutely take that. Because as good as he was, let's also remember, it's his first game in 19 months. There are some things he'll probably even go back and admit that were not great or things he could have done better. Certainly, he called the first on that first drive, he threw a pass that probably should have been intercepted. He said afterwards it was just a stupid throw, and then after that he sort of really settled down. So as he gets more comfortable with live game reps in this Georgia offense, he's allowed to get better too. It may not show up on the stat sheet, but he's going to get more and more comfortable the more and more game reps that he plays in this Georgia system. And if he looks good and Georgia wins out and the Georgia offense keeps making those explosive pass plays, and you combine that with an improved running game, which I do expect to get back on track. I think South Carolina is going to see what Mississippi State did and the struggles they had defending the pass and say, well, we can't let them just beat us deep, and we'll live Georgia trying to run 5-6 yards a carry. And if we have to make that choice, we'll make that choice. So, Johnny Lester brings up after Georgia smashes South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Missouri in a bowl game, that's not going to be a fun team, Georgia, you'd want to see in there. It kind of reminds me of the 2017 where that team at the end of the season was peaking and hitting on all cylinders. And obviously a disappointing part of the first season there in 2007. And I think you could say that again here, even though Georgia in 2007 beat Florida. This season, if they smash these remaining three teams, which they need to do. They need to come out and play full 60 minutes against these teams because they didn't do that against Mississippi State. That Cincinnati team is going to have very low levels of fun in that Peach Bowl, which I ultimately expect there to be their opponent there. So, let's see. Questions, comments, concerns. Favorite Thanksgiving side dish? Personally, it's mashed potatoes for me. I make mashed potatoes for my family. I think I do a very good job of them. Very much looking forward to Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite holidays. I know this year it's going to be very difficult with some of you for COVID. You might be alone. You might be certainly with a smaller gathering. I would say just reach out to some of your friends and family on Thursday, something that you almost always do anyway, but make a real effort this year to just check on friends, check on people, because not everyone may be able to be blessed to travel home and see their family and see some of the people that they so often comforted by around this time of year. So just be kind, be empathetic, and think of some of your other people out there who might not have the luxuries of being able to travel home this year. Let's see. I have not heard anything about South Carolina potentially backing out. To my knowledge, they don't have the COVID issues that you see some of the other teams around the country having. I don't think it'll be sort of a Florida State Clemson thing where Georgia will practice a player that was showing signs at some point during the week and give South Carolina the opportunity to back out. Georgia, and I think South Carolina too, they want to play these games. I don't think South Carolina wants to quit and turn around and run around or hide its tail. They came out and they played Missouri tough in the second half there, 17-10. I will note Luke Doty is probably the quarterback you're going to see for South Carolina this week. He got some run there in the second half for South Carolina last week, a freshman quarterback. And based on the way Will Rogers carved up the Georgia defense, you have to be wary of him, especially because Doty's a very good athlete, and I think he can move around and do some stuff back there. South Carolina may be without their best wide receiver in Shi Smith, who has a concussion that he's dealing with. But I'll be interested to see how this Georgia defense bounces back, where it's a little bit more of a conventional attack going against South Carolina than it was Mississippi State. Mississippi State was pretty much like playing Georgia Tech, only they throw instead of they run. Mississippi State, as you saw, they want to put themselves in favorable third down situations, and they consistently did that for the first three quarters. And then at the end of the game, Georgia sort of figured out what they needed to do. In that case, it was rushing 4 players instead of 3, and they affected Rogers and ultimately were able to get out of there with a win. So I'll be interested to see how the defense bounces back. So Keelan Susan Richter, happy Thanksgiving from down there in Moultrie, Georgia. I believe that's 229 territory. We're big fans down there. So hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. Green bean casserole, we like to see that. Are players leaving on Thanksgiving? No, they will be in Athens. I don't think it'll be a usual sort of Thanksgiving you sort of see you would have traditionally saw. LeCount and Davis update. LeCount will not be playing this week. As of yesterday, he is not even back practicing yet. Davis is a little bit more hopeful that you might see him. We did not get an update from Kirby on him tonight. We'll likely get one from him tomorrow afternoon on the coaches conference call. I would put a glass half full that you see him. I don't think you see him a whole lot. I think you're going to see a lot of Zion Logan go pro after this season, be a first-round pick or a high NFL draft pick. And that means Zion Logan's really going to have to step up for this Georgia team next year. And right now, I've sort of liked what I've seen from Logue at that sort of interior defensive line position. So sweet potato casserole, Kathy Garner. My mom makes a very good rendition of that. That's up there on my plate. That will be on my plate on Thursday out there. If JT stays in place next year and Brock comes in and Brock, yes, is coming in, do you see Mathis and Carson staying? I could see one of them staying, and I could certainly see one of them going. I don't know who will and who will do what yet. But, I mean, you never want to speculate on who that might be. That's wildly unfair to the kids. But you sort of look at the quarterback position and the transfers that always sort of seem to happen there. And the reality is you can only play one guy. And JT's pretty clearly got to be that guy for Georgia. So, Noah Sheldon, happy Thanksgiving to you. Let's see. Rome, Georgia. David Brown, welcome in. We'll go a few more minutes. We'll do three more good questions. Get a 404 dogs. If Georgia can find the defense and run game with JT at quarterback, they can turn the corner to become elite again. Yeah, it's that simple. I think the run game gets it back on track a little bit this week. The defense, maybe a little bit more skeptical of, just because they don't have LeCount out there, and I think it's so obvious what they miss with this defense and why it's sort of taken a step back is just because they don't have him out there. And yes, Louis Dean is really nice, and I think Christopher Smith has played pretty well, but there's just things that LeCount brings to the table that just aren't easily replaced, and we won't know officially until next year, unfortunately, whether or not this defense has turned in a meaningful way, turned the corner, because ultimately Georgia doesn't measure its defense, its running game against Mississippi State, South Carolina, Missouri, Vanderbilt. They measure it against how it plays against Florida, how it plays against Alabama, and how it'll play against Clemson. So we'll learn a lot more about Georgia's defense, really, in my opinion, September 4th next year. Let's see. 2 more questions. Do you think we should be using Washington like Florida uses Pitts? If Washington's as good as Pitts, absolutely, yes. But, and Kirby sort of touched on this tonight, he mentioned there were going to be some growing pains for Washington. Washington is not Pitts. Washington is not even Arik Gilbert, who played pretty well for LSU this past weekend. Washington, he's a big body guy, but he is not necessarily the in-space athlete that Pitts or Washington is. And to be frank, the freshman that should be getting the ball more is Jermaine Burton, who I think looked really, really good for Georgia on Saturday. 8 catches, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns. Came within 7 yards of setting the school record for tying the school record for receiving yards. So I think it'll be interesting to sort of see how Burton continues to develop and what they ultimately decide and how they decide to get Washington involved in the game. VTWS, do you think we could play with Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Notre Dame, the elite teams? This season with, maybe if you give them a month and Richard comes back and JT comes back, maybe, but they didn't have JT against Florida. They didn't have Richard against Florida. They didn't have JT against Alabama. And I think pretty clearly you saw in those games that they could not hang with those elite teams that you point out there, VTW. So if everything works out for Georgia and on paper, I think other than Bama, they can probably hang with those other 3 teams. And even I'd throw Florida in there as well. But to be frank here, I think Bama is far and away better than every other team in college football. Print the shirts, start playing the title parade. I just think they're so much better than everyone else. And I think they're going to win the national title this year. Daniel J. Donaldson, this is a good one. We might make this our last one. Who do you think is going to become the best pass rusher? I'm going to spin that forward to 2021 and sort of use that, and that comes from Daniel Donaldson. Spin that to what it looks like because Jermaine Johnson is a senior. He's had a sack. I don't know if you guys have noticed. Sacks in 4 straight games. Azeez Ojulari is someone who's now getting high NFL draft round buzz, and I wouldn't be surprised if he chooses to go pro. So what does that mean for Georgia's pass rush in 2021? It means it's time for Nolan Smith. And I know some people are wondering, well, where has he been? Why isn't he getting the sacks? And the biggest thing is just he has Azeez Ojulari right in front of him. And I think Azeez does a lot of the same things that Nolan does, only Azeez is a year older. He's a little bit more developed than Nolan is. And unfortunately, Nolan's going to have to wait his turn. But you've seen him in flashes, and that's what's still encouraging to me. It's not like he hasn't shown that he's belonged. It's just he hasn't, I think, been able to get that consistent playing time. And that's because of the fact that Azeez is in front of him. Now, if Azeez comes back, that's obviously my answer. But the thing with Azeez and Nolan is just they are so similar in what they do, and Georgia just doesn't really play those 2 body types on the field at the same time. Jermaine Johnson, clearly a bigger guy than both of them, and you're getting really good production out of him. I think this year it is Jermaine and Azeez, your top 2 outside linebackers, but you've seen flashes from Nolan Smith and Adam Anderson from a pure speed rusher standpoint that VTW brings up in terms of seeing the ball more. He doesn't cover as well as Jermaine does. He's not as physical as Jermaine is, but from a pure speed rushing standpoint, he's shown that that is a skill he absolutely has in his tool bag. It's why he has 3.5 sacks this season. And I don't know if he comes back or what he decides to do, but I absolutely think for that pass rushing purely, he might not do everything else well, but that is a skill I think that he has that can potentially translate to an NFL level there. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, and I've actually sort of been avoiding it because I can't. And Akimi Udoku, who will replace Monty Rice. I believe Monty Rice, I think the foot injury has slowed him down a little bit this year. I think Nakobe Dean is going to move more directly into his spot, and you're going to see Quay Walker take some more snaps. But this season, we've seen Channing Tindall this last week against Mississippi State, and I think you're going to see him again against South Carolina take some snaps. They landed Shmuel Mondon last week, though I don't expect him to necessarily be a day one instant impact player. Jamon Dumas-Johnson is another inside linebacker that I think pretty highly of and can be a good player. Monty Rice is not going to be an easy guy to replace for Georgia next year. He's played just a ton of football. Jim Withrow brings up, play Nolan in the middle more. I wouldn't be stunned if Georgia does decide to get creative with Nolan there, especially if Aziz does end up coming back. So that sort of middle linebacker, it's a very interesting position that Georgia's going to have to replace guys with. And, unlike maybe what you're seeing right now without Richard LeCounte out there, they're still playing Monty, so they don't necessarily have to totally answer that question right now. So with that, we've got about 36 minutes here. That'll do it for me tonight. I don't know what we're doing for Before the Hedge just tomorrow. If Jeff is there, Jeff's on vacation this week. It's Thanksgiving on Thursday. There will be Dog Nation Daily on Friday. I don't think there'll be before the week, but hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. It is my favorite holiday. Hope you can spend some time chatting with your families or getting to sit down and eat with them. Stay safe out there. Georgia plays South Carolina on Saturday at 7:30. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully it's another Georgia win. Hopefully JT Daniels looks good and plays good. And everyone have a great Thanksgiving. Have a great rest of the week.